It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with our very own Florence Villeminot. Hi, Flo. So today we're going to focus on something that follows you around your entire life, and that is, of course, your name. Now, a name can be a source of pride, but it can also bring a heavy burden to some people, and changing your last name here in France actually is about to get a little bit easier. French lawmakers are debating a bill that would help you do just that.
Absolutely. And before we dive into this very interesting topic, let's take a French lesson, because in French, when you talk about your prénom, that is your first name, Flo, Jeannie, and when you talk about your nom de famille, that's your last name, and that is we're going to be focusing on in the first part of this show, so that's our expression du jour. Currently, changing your last name is a long, costly, and difficult affair. You basically have to prove to the Ministry of Justice that there's a legitimate reason for doing this. 35% of cases are denied. Now, some people want to change their last names because it's a difficult homonym. For instance, cocu, cuckold. You might want to change your last name if it's that. Other times it's because it's difficult to pronounce. For instance, Gustave Bockenhausen changed his name to Gustave Eiffel in 1877. Of course, the Bockenhausen Tower would have had a very different ring to it. But often people want to change their last names after traumatic situations like violence or incest in their families. For instance, people who were neglected or abandoned by their parents.
Là, le nom qui est sur cette carte d'identité, sur ce papier officiel, il évoque quoi pour vous?
Il évoque la douleur, l'absence et l'inconnu. Et il évoque tout le contraire de ce que m'a apporté ma famille maternelle, ma mère, qui m'ont transmis leurs valeurs, qui m'ont transmis leur tradition, j'ai envie de dire, et qui m'ont transmis aussi beaucoup d'amour, et il manque juste leur nom, en fait.
Now, last year, around 3,500 people took steps to change their name, and this new law would actually make it a lot easier for more people to do so, especially if you want to take your mother's last name. All you'd have to do then is go to the town hall and fill out a form.
That's right. At the age of 18, you'd be able to decide whether you want to keep your father's last name or your mother's last name, or both, in whichever order you want. Now, keep in mind that since 2002, parents in France have legally been allowed to choose a surname for their children rather than automatically have it be the father's last name. But about 85% of children in France receive their father's last name, and often this has to do with tradition. In fact, there's an expression in French that a mother gives life, a father gives a name. But this can be a real administrative headache for women who have children who choose to keep their maiden name or have to switch back to it after a divorce. Basically, they have to walk around with their kids' birth certificate to prove that they're not kidnapping them.
Je ne porte pas le même nom que mes enfants, et dans mon quotidien, c'était devenu extrêmement pénible de devoir justifier être la maman. C'est quelque chose qui est dégradant.
Vu qu'on n'est pas mariés, moi je veux que mes enfants portent mon nom aussi. Sinon, je me dis, j'ai pas le même nom qu'eux, donc je suis pas la mère. Je sais pas, c'est pas pareil. Là, maintenant, je sais que je suis la mère de Florian.
So changing your last name from one parent to the next is about to get easier. When it comes to changing your first name, that already was pretty straightforward.
That's right. You just have to go to your local town hall, but you have to give a good reason for why you want to change your first name. Essentially, you have to prove somehow that it causes you harm. One case that tends to come up are French citizens of foreign origin who want to Frenchify their names.
Peut-être des gens nés à l'étranger qui souhaitent franciser leur prénom parce qu'ils estiment que leur prénom est discriminé, que ce soit lorsqu'ils souhaitent trouver un travail ou un logement.
Now, another argument that people can give for changing their names is that it's just ridiculous. And even though authorities do try to stop parents from giving crazy names to their kids, it does still happen.
That's right. Now, up until 1993, a revolutionary law actually obliged parents in France to choose a prénom, so a first name, for their babies from a long list of acceptable names. And these were essentially Catholic names or saints names or historic names from French history. Now, after that, parents were allowed to do whatever they want, and there was kind of open season. Some parents got very creative, though authorities can block a name if they deem that it will cause a child harm. And this led to some very, very high-profile, controversial cases that got a lot of attention in the media. For instance, baby Nutella, Fraise, Strawberry, Jihad, and Demon all had to change their names. And then in 2010, there was the case of baby MJ, whose parents were, of course, Michael Jackson fans, and they had to start calling him Jean.
Il connaît son prénom, il parle déjà très bien. Et à mon avis, si dès demain je lui dis « Tu viens mon petit Jean ?» il va pas vraiment comprendre. Là.
On comprend pas pourquoi MG ça lui porterait préjudice.
Right. As we all know, at least if you've had kids, choosing a name is very, very subjective. And yet a lot of people do tend to choose the same one. So what are the most popular baby names here in France?
Well, let's look at the most popular names in 2020. For girls, it was baby Jade, Louise, and Emma. And for boys, baby Léo, Gabriel, and Raphaël. So what's interesting is these top three names for boys and girls have really been popular for years, but names are really like fashion and they go in and out of style. For instance, in the 90s, when US TV series started coming to France, you got all sorts of baby Kevin, and Jennifer. These days, it's all about baby Kylian, like Kylian Mbappé. It's a big name as well. And old school names are making a comeback as well. Got a lot of baby Augustin and Edgar. And like a lot of things, French people have very strong opinions about names.
Kevin, tous les trucs un peu américains, machin, non.
Quand j'étais jeune, moi j'aurais aimé m'appeler Jacqueline ou Monique. Moi, c'était les prénoms à la mode à l'époque. Et Chantal, ça me plaisait pas trop.
Jean-Pierre, je ne donnerai pas à mon enfant parce que déjà petit, ça fait plus vieux.
Calliope.
Mégane. J'espère que vous n'appelez pas Mégane.
A name is so much more than a name, though. Sociologists say that names are massive economic and social markers, a status symbol, if you will, and they certainly can mark a generation. Take this from a Florence, which is a current name here in France, but apparently an old lady name in the United States.
Well, try to imagine being called Eugenie in America. It was not easy. Thus, Jeannie. There you go. Flo, thank you so much. That was our French connections, again, looking at French names. Don't forget, if you want to get a closer look or if you have your own questions about France or the French, you can always tweet Flo at Flo Villeneuve.